My name is Nickesia Gordon. I'm associate professor in the School of Communication at RIT. And most of my research looks at the intersection of gender, race, and nationality as it pertains to communication representation. And I'm originally from Jamaica, the Caribbean, so a lot of my work does focus on that. I do have some practical background in communication. I used to be a journalist in Jamaica, mostly in television, but I also did print. I wrote for one of the national papers there for about 2 years. And then off I went into academia after that. I think my background as a practitioner in media led me eventually to study communication with my PhD. So my first 2 degrees are actually in English literature. I thought that for the longest time I was going to be a writer. And so I come from the Caribbean where these celebrated writers like Derek Walcott and so on, and I was very inspired by their work, and so I figured, hey, that's going to be my calling. But then almost right after high school, I got a job working in television, and I loved it. And even while I was pursuing my undergraduate and my master's degree while I was working, I still, had that love and that passion. And so when I decided I wanted to do a further education, I thought it would be a good move and to kind of marry the two, my English background with my communication background. And so I pursued my PhD at Howard in mass media and culture. And I also think that the focus that I have now is also part of my Caribbean upbringing. I've always been known, I didn't know this, talking to folks that I went to high school with, they labeled me as a feminist even then. And I wasn't thinking I was being so, expressly feminist in my outlook, but that's how they remembered me. And so I guess it came full circle in terms of how my work focuses on gender and race and nationality based on, again, I'm a Black woman, but not just a Black woman from the Caribbean that is often labeled as a part of the global South, third world. And so all of the politics that intersects with my identity makes me want to explore that, to study that, to show, the dignity of that identity as well in scholarship. I think they're very limited and potentially can be stereotypical. And we know that stereotypes put people in a box and doesn't necessarily do justice to the society or to individuals. And so I'm sure you've heard of the term Jamaica no problem man. And if you encounter, or I should say, when I just moved to the United States and I encountered others, that's kind of the first thing that they would say to me, Jamaica no problem man. And this kind of pseudo Jamaican patois, the expectation that, I'd be up for smoking weed and bonging, and that all we did was lay on the beach and everyone lived like within walking distance to the beach and life was just easy. And while that is part and parcel of how Jamaica, at least the national government, sells Jamaica for tourism, that's part of the economic reality of Jamaica. But it is a far cry from the lived reality of those from the Caribbean and from Jamaica specifically. It's a very diverse place. I mean, even though predominantly most of the population hail from West Africa, but we do have a strong Chinese population, we have a strong Indian population, even from the Middle East. And so our national motto is out of many one people. And I don't think that diversity is expressed a lot through these stereotypical images that we often encounter via media representations, which again, are fiction. And fiction is sexy, fiction sells. And so I would like people to know also through my research that there's a lot more to Jamaica and the Caribbean than those stereotypical images. I think this current line of research that I'll talk a little bit more about in your Professor Srivi's class is an attempt to broaden the theoretical frameworks or access to frameworks that will help us understand the nuances of the Caribbean lived experiences, especially for women. And so that's part of the decolonizing project, I believe, into showing that while we're not saying that theories that derive from Euro-America are not relevant or not important, they do not capture the lived experiences of other places. And I think that scholars such as Chandra Mohanty kind of made this point almost more than 20 years ago, that this monolithic approach to explaining feminism is limiting, and it doesn't really account for how there may be nuances and differences in how others express their feminism. So there's not one feminism, there are multiple feminisms, and a lot of the traditional theories don't necessarily acknowledge that. And other places have their own cultural norms that dictate some of their communication patterns, which is some of the things I talk about in terms of how Caribbean women communicate as rhetors, that is deeply rooted in that whole colonization experience, that whole experience of plantation slavery, post-colonialism, and how they use their voice as resistance in a way that may not be recognized. And also there's that layer of being from the so-called third world that also, I guess, drowns out the legitimacy of those voices as being recognized as a viable way in which some people communicate and express themselves. And so I think we need to develop more frames that will bring those voices closer to the center, instead of seeing them as other, as marginalized, or as Creole. Well, not Creole, but, you know, somehow like the lesser stepchild, if you may. Yeah.